Was Ma'at a historical figure for them, like a real figure, a real goddess? Was there like an actual Ma'at? Or?
Some people believe that she was a real person who became a deity. Some people believe that Ma'at is simply a principle of nature.
The most common position among Kemets is these are stand-ins for principles or elements.
Yeah.
So Ma'at is not real.
Most of them don't think so.
Yeah.
It's rare to find one who thinks these gods are real.
And that's the only reason I ask that is because hey, good to see you again. This is Michael Williams here with another episode of Street Level Apologetics TV, where we give you street level apologetics in the city context. And so we are back with another discussion, and we have a special guest. Actually, I'm doing the hosting today because I want to interview my main man, Vocab Malone, urban apologist extraordinaire, and our special guest from undisclosed area of the world, DNew.
Hey.
So we are here today. We're actually going to talk about, you see all these books on the table? They are talking about Egyptologists, and we're also going to talk about the Kemetic area of urban apologetics that maybe many people don't know about. This happens to be one of DNew's specialty. I believe you taught some classes on it at the Doctor for the Block, correct?
I did, yeah.
Tell the audience how you got into this particular apologetic or this subject.
Well, this is the story that I say, and I'm sticking with it. I got involved because another urban apologist by the name of Alfredo Valentin, who goes by the name of BK Apologist on YouTube, he brought some videos to my attention. So primarily it was a video with Young Pharaoh. I don't know if your audience is familiar with Young Pharaoh, but he is a social media influencer. Has a large audience, and he just said some things that, particularly about Black women, that I felt needed to be addressed. And so, after I did that video, I said to myself, "Let me see what else this community believes." And so that's kind of what got my my attention onto the Kemetic community.
So Young Pharaoh basically brought out your inner Keisha, and you had to defend Black women from a Christian standpoint. I got it. You brought out your inner Keisha. Yeah, Keisha had to be defended. I got you.
And just so check this out, Mike. Young Pharaoh, sounds crazy, right?
Right.
This dude has multiple channels. All of them have high sub counts. Such a well-known social media influencer of like millennials, Gen Z. Mm-hmm. That he was invited to speak at CPAC, which is like Conservative Political Action Committee. It's like the young conservatives where they get together once a year.
Right.
He was invited to speak there. So imagine you would have like people from the Trump administration and then Young Pharaoh speaking on the same stage.
That didn't even fit. Did they invite him because it's the conservative part of him, or did they invite him because maybe there was some part of his message that kind of like tangled with their message, but they really didn't agree with it? Was it just like a...
I think that he has some positions they would consider conservative. Yeah. I forgot about what exactly it is.
I do too, but yes, he does say some, have some sound bites and some talking points that would agree with their platform. But the thing is, whoever found him did not do their due diligence.
They didn't vet him enough.
Yes.
He got uninvited shortly after.
Yeah.
Wow.
He got quickly disinvited, and it was all over the news. So.
Yeah, you can find these stories, actually. What's his real name?
His
first name? I thought you knew it.
Yeah. I think it's Marshall. If I'm not mistaken, it's Marshall.
It was wild to see his name like in the mainstream news, and then the fact that he would have been on stage with Trump administration officials speaking with young Republicans and stuff. And so, yeah, he got disinvited primarily for anti-Semitic statements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the Kemetic world, the Egyptologist world seems to be like, if you're not paying attention to it, it could present different arguments that you might say, oh, I might agree with that point. Kind of like how Young Pharaoh may have said something like, I agree with that. But then like as they talk and they continue to go on in their thought process, then it becomes really clear that I don't agree with nothing they're saying. Right?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. And is that similar to how I don't want to say Hebrew Israelism, but there's like if you listen to like one sentence, and you're like, oh yeah, you know, Moses was an Old Testament prophet. And you're like, yeah. And then they're like, but he had 3 legs and an afro and dreadlocks. And you're like, well, hold on. You were good at first. Is that kind of how it is with Egyptology? Or is like all of their thought process just so far off to where, like, how do they reel in people to believe what they believe?
I would say at first glance, some appear quite intellectual and erudite.
Yeah. You know, another good example of what you just said is we also did another show concerning an individual, Frank James, who was the Brooklyn subway shooter. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That was a story I think was in May, something like that. And it turns out that once we went to his YouTube channel and just listened to a few of his videos, he had some conscious community, Kemetic community talking points. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, the Kemetic community, this is what they produce, but certainly some of their ideas can take people places. And so that's how far-reaching this is. You can have people who are intelligent and, you know, well-spoken, but you can, if you just get a few of the talking points and, you know, kind of weaponize them a little bit, it can definitely have an impact on you and other people. So.
One of the main people it seems like Frank James listened to was someone named Hassan Campbell. And I don't know if Hassan Campbell would really be able to be considered Kemetic from what I was able to tell, but definitely within the conscious community, he would be fit under that large umbrella. So conscious community, you know, would be like the Kemets or the Egyptologists are part of it. Sometimes people even include the Hebrew Israelites under that spectrum of conscious community, and Afrocentric or Black atheists would be included in there. People trying to do what they view as like more traditional, you know, proper, ethnically proper religion, say from the west coast of Africa or something like that, African spiritual forms, they might sometimes say, they would kind of fit under that. And then there's like a variety of people. And then within the Kemets, they definitely don't all agree with each other. You know, it's interesting to see.
Almost every religion. There's a dissension in every religion.
It's highly to the person, to the man, more so than a lot of other like belief systems. It's almost like, well, they don't use the term guru, but it's almost like, here's my Kemetic guru, here's my Kemetic guru. But then they'll kind of take bits and pieces as far as the people who follow or listen. But yeah, they kind of all blend together, and they'll be on platforms like House of Consciousness or places like this. And some of these platforms online get pretty big. And you don't realize how big it is until you stumble upon it and see all these subs.
So let's walk it back. We started out with introduction, how you got into it, and we started about kind of an overall viewpoint. Then we got on Young Pharaoh, right, and how they kind of just totally dropped the ball, and they was about to invite the guy on there who was probably going to mess up their whole platform. Trump would have got arrested for this young black guy on here with dreads when they got him all messed up. Let's walk it back. Like, what's the origin? I mean, you hear Egyptologist, and you think just from the name that it's a very old thought process, because you would hear that Kemetic, African, you hear these things and this seems ancient. What's the actual origin, and what are like the foundational points of what this group of people believe?
Well, let me say this first. Let me just kind of go a little bit more introductory. So Kemet is what ancient Egypt is called. So we call the landmass that we call Egypt today was once called Kemet. And so Kemet equals ancient Egypt. Okay. And so, you know, if you speak to someone in the Kemetic community today, which the Kemetic community is comprised of individuals, very broadly speaking, it's comprised of individuals who are of the thought that people of African descent need to return or rediscover their African
their
spiritual roots. Yeah.
Man, can I interject?
Yeah.
So if what percentage would you think of the, I don't know, whatever community it is, what percentage would you say, you know, finishing with where you're at, would you say that the Kemetic community kind of involves? Like if there were 10 black people, right, and let's say 3 were Christian, you know, 2 were Muslim, like what out of 10 people, how many people you think could fall under the Kemetic type doctrine, if you want to say that?
I think that I don't know if you would answer this differently, but I mean, within the conscious community, which is what we're talking about, as Vocab said a few moments ago, there's different groups. In addition to the groups that he just said, there's also Nation of Islam.
Right.
There's 5%ers. There's Moorish Science Temple. And so when you think about all of these groups, to get a percentage, I would venture to say, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 just Kemeticism. What would you say?
Out of 10, like what are you saying? It's just kind of hard to gauge, or
2, 3, 4.
It's hard to gauge.
Yeah,
I don't know.
but it's enough to pay attention to it. It's not like this guy out here is like, hey, I am a Vietnamese, Hebrew, Israelite, Catholic. Like, it's probably 1 out of 5. These are like, it's enough to put a lot of attention into it, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. It's these ideas have and are impacting thousands of people. There's a ton of people of African descent who have left Christianity, who have left the Black church, who have just left Jesus for ideas like this. It's absolutely prevalent and needs to be addressed.
And just to be clear, or just ask, so I know that we're talking about Africans, Egypt, Kemetic. This is mainly an African American problem. Like, they don't have like a sect of like South African Kemetics or something like that are like a big part of it, or is this like just a Black thing, or?
So
Well, I don't know about a lot of Africans in Africa being part of it, but isn't like Kemetic orthodoxy like kind of like white folks?
Yeah,
or
yeah.
kind of like New Agey type
Yeah,
of thing?
yeah.
So there's a kind of a white Kemeticism. That's not really what we're talking about, but
Right.
but that's
Okay.
a thing.
Yeah, so it's the caveat when we talk about these things is we are talking about it from an urban apologetic
Right.
standpoint, and so there is
There's like another sect of it, but
Yeah.
it's probably so minute that the main part of it is probably
Kemetic orthodoxy is very well known as well, and it's prevalent, but it's not. It includes people of European descent, right? Something that's totally different from what we're talking about today. So
Here, I read one thing about Kemetic orthodoxy, which is not what we're talking about. It helps people to understand there's, the people especially in the West, have been fascinated with Egypt for a long time.
Right.
We got a book about it. That bottom one, Egyptomania, by Fritz, I think is how you say the author's name.
So the book right here.
That shows like, essentially the obsession with Egypt. So this is from page 104 of Profane Egyptologist. Kemetic orthodoxy was established under the leadership of Tamara el Saouda, the current Nisut, often translated as authority. It began with a meditative trance in 1988, which Saouda had undertaken as part of her initiation as a Wiccan priestess. Saouda claims to have felt contacted by ancient Egyptian deities and charged to revive Kemet's long-forgotten ways and bring them to a new generation of the faithful, helping to return the love and wisdom of Ma'at to a modern world sorely in need of it. She subsequently left the Wiccan faith. I'm sorry. She apostatized from Wicca.
Right.
And began meeting with a small group of college friends for study and worship. According to the webpage dedicated to the Nisut, I'm probably not pronouncing everything right, sorry. The appeal of Egypt was long-standing for Saouda. Here's the quote, and I'll end here. Ancient Egypt called to her imagination, to her strong sense of history and tradition, and finally to her innermost heart. End quote. It is of note that this phrasing of calling and the phenomena of contact, invited or no, are recurrent themes when studying Kemeticism, locating the religion within a framework of wider religious terminology. And before this book, the only kind of Kemeticism, as far as in the modern era, that had been documented in an academic setting, according to this book, was Kemetic orthodoxy. Now, this book gets into some of the other branches, so it's not just some folks that are fascinated with Egypt. There's a lot of people. Some of their reasonings are kind of different, though, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and ancient Egypt is such a a vast and interesting civilization, right? It's old. It's 3,000 BC is what we're talking about, and so people who have a fascination with history and just with civilizations, ancient civilizations in general, are really attracted to Egypt, ancient Egypt.
So going back to the previous question, so we can kind of update the audience. It's an old religion, or it's an old thought process. It goes all the way back to, like you say, 3000 BC. What are some of the foundations that a Kemetic person would hang their hats on now? You know, going from, I know pretty much every religion, every doctrine has morphed over the years. But what are some of their core beliefs, and how would you, I guess you would say, identify that a person's actually really involved in Egyptology? And other than dressing like Pharaoh, other than that, and stuff like that, or, you know, they don't dress like Pharaoh. I'm just making that up. But how would you identify?
Well, wait, who doesn't dress like Pharaoh? Some of these guys do dress like Pharaoh.
Do they? I was making a joke.
Yeah,
but I guess I was right.
Some of them, some have claimed, although I've heard they've walked back from the claim. Some practitioners have even claimed to be reincarnated pharaohs.
Wow! And from reading the first book, this kind of started. Did this start with like a vision, like some of these other false religions? Did somebody just had or this was just a bunch of teachings that they've kind of held as tradition for thousands of years, and it's just morphed into different doctrines like that? Would
you agree that the side of Kemeticism that's not Kemetic orthodoxy seemed to have a revival under a broader revival of what you might call Afrocentrism? And here's Afrocentrism, and Kemet comes along with it sometimes.
Yeah, really, you can't really talk about Kemeticism, the Kemeticism that we're talking about right now, without, talking about, what happened to Black people, the transatlantic slave trade, people being kidnapped from their homeland and brought to, in the travesty, the devastation, all of what Black people experienced, and which culminated in the loss of identity and dignity. You can't talk about this without referring to that, because that is what this is kind of in response to, a rejection of Christianity, because these people see colonization as a result of European Christianity proper, and so. Really, the thing that drives Kemeticism, in my estimation, in dealing with these groups and being in faith in groups and hearing the conversations, the thing that drives this group is really this anti-Christian sentiment, right? Just this hatred of Christianity and what it represents to them and as a people, right? The thought is that Black people have no business being Christians. Yeah.
Whereas Kemeticism is seen as what sometimes scholars call ATR, an African traditional or traditionalist religion. So it's an African spirituality. And from what I've seen, most sane Kemetic practitioners won't necessarily claim to have like some kind of direct kinship with Egypt or Egyptians. Usually they'll understand that's not the providence for most folks, but they'll say, well, it's still an African, traditional religion. It's from the continent. It's an African spiritual form, and so that's proper, or more proper, to do this. But real quick, like here's a little book, "We Can't Go Home Again: An Argument About Afrocentrism." Clarence Walker. These are not Christian authors, to my understanding, and this book is against it. This little book is an intervention in the debates about Afrocentrism. It offers a critique of the focus of an Afrocentric discourse on Egypt called Kemet, both as a Black civilization as the progenitor of Western civilization. In making this argument, I readily acknowledge that Afrocentrism is a popular form of Black cultural nationalism. And then here's how a Afrocentric spokesman defines Afrocentrism, because I see Kemeticism as a sort of part of underneath it. This is from Molifi K. Asante, and he says, "The Afrocentrist seeks to uncover and use codes, paradigms, symbols, motifs, myths, and circles of discussion that reinforce the centrality of African ideas and values as a valid frame of reference for acquiring and examining data. Such a method appears to go beyond Western history in order to revalorize the African place in the interpretation of Africans, continental, and diaspora," end quote. And the unifying factor is they hate or detest Christianity.
Now we got to bring the elephant in the room. We talked about the major S word, not that other word, but the word slavery, right? And so I actually watched a documentary on slavery on YouTube. It's about 13 minutes long. It's basically like 10 facts you didn't know about slavery, right? And there's some astonishing claims in there made about actually how the transatlantic slave trade actually happened, like from an objective viewpoint. It's made by a black group, so it wasn't made by like the colonizers or the evil white man. And they gave some really interesting facts about it. And if you were to look at the whole practice of slavery from like an objective standpoint, you would get a different picture than what you would just say. Let's just say an American version of slavery is. Not that it was better or worse, but the video made it clear to say, hey, chattel slavery is bad, but it didn't start when they crossed the water. It actually started in Africa with other Africans trapping other Africans and then trading them off. Is their viewpoint of slavery just evil European people came and they did what, like we had no part in it? Can they admit that there was slavery existing there and take blame for it or take part for that evil? Or is it just like it happened to us, we have nothing to do with it, we didn't have no? Because when I was watching that video, right, we'll put the link in the screen at the bottom so you can go watch it yourself. It didn't minimize Americans' role in slavery, but it did open up another discussion to say, hey, this group of tribe went 500 miles inland and brought slaves 500 miles to the coast. So, yeah, we can talk about slavery, but do they have an objective viewpoint of slavery, or it's just Christians did it, we hate Christians, the white man's evil, and how is their historical acumen? Like, are they objective, or it's just
their starting point isn't from what happened on the landmass. It's what happened to them.
It's after the boat.
Yeah. And again, secondary to Afrocentrism, the Europeans and colonization, again, is just really representative of Christianity to them. So colonization is not something most cultures are happy with. I guess I can say it that way. But you can even see it in their memes when you look into their beliefs. You can see the same thing in their memes, like this idea that Christianity was started with colonization, that Africa didn't know about Christianity until colonization happened. This idea that Christianity was started at the Council of Nicaea by Europeans, and so it's really just a response to Christianity and to European colonization and Europeans to some extent.
So they just like pretty much the Bible's false to them. Everything from the Bible is based on African history or African origin, right?
They believe that Christianity is a copycat of ancient Egyptian religion or ancient Egyptian mythology.
So do they have like their own book that they read from? Do they have like their own traditions? Like who are their deities? Like if you're saying that this idea from the scriptures is taking from your ideas, then you would have to assume that you have parallel thought process. Like this book is about one deity. This book is about you. So who is their deity? Like this had prophets, leaders, kings. So who do they parallel? They say we copied it. Well, what do they believe Christians copied it from? Like, is there like a big book of hieroglyphics somewhere, or what's going on?
So let me just give a disclaimer. Whenever we talk about these things, we have to say some, not all, because it's so varying and vast in belief. So, and it depends on who you're speaking to when you ask this question. So, one thing that they believe is a copycat, if you will, is they believe that the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20 of the Bible is a copycat of what is called the 42 laws of Ma'at, which the 42 laws of Ma'at is somewhat of a misnomer. They're not laws. They're negative confessions.
And who is Ma'at? Just so the crowd can know. Who is he or her or it or they?
Ma'at is a goddess.
Okay.
She is a she.
Okay.
And she is the goddess. Ma'at basically maintains order. So ancient Egyptian, the two opposing ideals, we'll say for now, are balance, order versus chaos.
Okay. So that's kind of their good and evil.
The goal is to maintain balance and order. And if that is not maintained, and chaos results, then, negative things happen, bad things happen. And so the goal is always to be in balance. Balance, order, reciprocity, righteousness, justice. This was represented by the goddess Ma'at. And so the 42 laws, or I'd rather say the 42 negative confessions of Ma'at. I don't know if we have them here.
You got them right in here?
Yeah. So
he calls them the 42 tenets in his pamphlet.
Mm-hmm. And so what happens is what people will do, what practitioners will do is they will start their day with saying, I will not.
It's like a chant.
It's a confession. It's a confession.
You can be nice if you want. It's chanting, right? They got some pigs over here in the corner with some chickens morning. Yeah, I know. It's just, I'm gonna be mean.
If I could read from this pamphlet.
Yeah. Let me ask one more question before you read from it. Was Ma'at a historical figure for them, like a real figure, a real goddess? Was there like an actual Ma'at, or is this somebody that's a tradition that they wrote about?
It depends on who you speak to. Some people believe them to be actual individuals who became deities.
No, I'm talking about Ma'at. Like they're saying the 42 tenets of Ma'at. Was she a real person?
Yes.
Or?
Some people believe that she was a real person who became a deity. Some people believe that Ma'at is simply a principle of nature. Some people believe that it's simply just a concept. Depends on who you're speaking to.
Who was the guy I debated who seemed to hold that the Egyptian deities were actually some kind of extraterrestrial beings, like aliens that we were Tahuti that we were aware of, and so we would see them as gods or divine, but they're actually extraterrestrials, like they're actually basically aliens.
So
that was Brother Tahuti. That's a minority position. I think the most common position among Kemets is these are stand-ins for principles or elements.
Yeah.
So Ma'at is not real.
Most of them don't think so.
Yeah.
It's rare to find one who thinks these gods are real.